Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Angie Carpenter, Town of Islip Supervisor, and I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to Town Hall.
Thank you. I'm Rabbi Shimon Stillerman from Chabad of Islip, and I guess the newest member of the renamed Unity Council. Thank you, Supervisor, for having us here today, and for everybody for coming out to join us. You know, we meet many people in our lives, many wonderful people, but then there's a category of people that we connect to, maybe just a handful in our lifetime, which truly make our life change to become more meaningful by the fact that we meet them. And Edith Gross is someone who I'm so honored and blessed to have met, someone who I can say that since meeting her, my life has become a lot more meaningful. Edith taught me a lot about life without ever preaching to me about life, just by the example of her sterling character, her perseverance, her strength, and her response to life's struggles. In addition to this, I believe that all Holocaust survivors are holy. They're holy by the fact of the experiences that they went through. It demands our respect. And this is a respect that Edith certainly deserves. So today, when we're all gathered here to hear from her and be in her presence, realize how special it is to be here and hear from her, because there aren't many Holocaust survivors that we can merit hearing from, certainly not one who's a resident of our own town. And Edith is extra special and truly one of a kind because of what she represents. She chooses to speak today, and she chooses to speak in the past, and promised that she certainly wants to do so in the future in good health, because she refuses to respond to her losses and her horrifying experience by giving in to the darkness and allowing hate to win. Instead, she chooses to remind everyone how hateful hate is and what we can do to rid the world of it. That light can dispel darkness and that love can kill hate. For us, this is just a slogan, but for her, for Edith, it's a powerful choice that she makes. Today, on Yom HaShoah, and every day, we remember 6 million Jews who were killed just because they were born Jewish, including most of Edith's family. Testimony is shared that even on the way to the gas chambers, these innocent souls would sing the Ani Mamin, the tune I Believe, proclaiming the Jewish belief in the coming of the Messiah. So picture this for a moment. As these people are being marched to their death, witnessing the worst darkness the world has ever seen, they choose to proclaim their belief in a better future and in a better humankind. Because you see, the belief in the coming of the Messiah is not just the belief in a particular person coming to save the world. Judaism shares that Messiah is not merely a person, it's an era. It's an era of a repaired and perfected world, a world that entirely proclaims goodness, kindness, and love, completely transforming all darkness into light. So this tune that they sang while witnessing such darkness is the ultimate proclamation of faith, believing the world can be better and will be better. Edith sharing her story is this very proclamation. She reminds all that will listen about what happens when hate goes unanswered. She believes that we can change the world one person at a time until there will be hate no more. And this message is so important today, after the latest reports that were released, that the year 2021 had a record surge in anti-Semitic incidents. So I hope we can walk away today, after hearing from Edith, to join her in this mission, to do all that we can to bring about such an era, to ensure that when we say never again, it truly means something. It never again is a world with no place for hate, because there will be hate no more, not because we chased it away with a broomstick, but because we lit the match of love and kindness, because there will be no place for darkness when all we have is light. So it's my absolute honor to introduce Edith to all of you today. So please join me in giving her the most deserved and respected recognition and the blessing of good life, good health, and much nachas from her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, some of whom are with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Edith Gross.
Good afternoon. My name is Edith Gross, and I'm 93 years old, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. I I was born in Czechoslovakia, and life was very good. We had a lot of ethnic difference in our city: Russian, Czechs, Hungarians, Jews, and everybody got along fine. There was never any problem, never experienced any anti-Semitism or anything. And in 1939, we were occupied by Hungary. And right away, as soon as the Hungarians occupied, their first thing was they took away all licenses from the Jews. The Jews could not make really a living. It was very, very hard struggle for them. And all of a sudden, even in schools, children started to yell, "A dirty Jew," and go back to Palestine. And just everything has changed. And that's the only time when we started to have anti-Semitism. And shortly after the occupation, my mother died. And my father was in the United States since I was very little. That's okay. It's okay.
Take your time.
Yeah. And things were completely different with anti-Semitism. Life became very tough. It was very, very hard for Jewish people to make a living. And then in 1943 or 44, all of a sudden we heard the Germans are occupying Hungary, and we knew things are not going to be good. But I do remember going out and watching the Germans coming in, the German army on Main Street, and they were so tall, and they was big shiny boots, and we knew that things will change completely. And but before that, my brother, I had twin brothers and a sister, and one of the twin brothers was drafted into the Hungarian army, and at that time Europe had a terrible epidemic of typhus, and he got sick. And when he complained, they didn't believe him that he is sick. And by the time they took him to the hospital, he was dead. He was 22 years old.
Edith, how old were you?
I was 10 years old
10.
when my mother died, yes. And when my brother died, I must have been about 11 or 12, something like that. My brother was 7 years older than me, and my sister was 4 years older than I was. And sure enough, as soon as the Germans occupied, next day we had to wear a yellow star. And within days, they organized ghettos. And there was a lot of little villages all around our city. And all the Jews were brought into the city, to the ghetto. And we lived in a small house, and about 2 more families had to move in with us. It was really very crowded conditions. And very, very, very shortly after that, they started the transportation. Different groups went, and with the cattle cars coming in, and we heard that the first, I happened to be in the last transport that we took us, and we heard that the first transport was already dead. We somehow didn't face up to it. We did not believe it, really. It was just very hard to believe. And then our time came, and there were about 70 or 80 people shoved into those cattle cars. My grandmother, she said, "I am not going." And so a Nazi came, and he just picked her up with a hand, and they just threw her in another car there. And the conditions in this train, the bathroom was just one little pail for everybody, for children, for ladies. There was no privacy or anything. And soon, very soon, the smells in this cattle car, and no water, no food, no anything, and the conditions became so deteriorated. If I I could still smell the terrible, terrible odors, and the thirst was unbearable. And finally, I don't know how long we were driving. I understand only 2 days, but it seems like 2 years. We were just riding and riding, very hopeless, very unbelieving. And finally, we arrived at Auschwitz. And as soon as the train, the doors opened up, and the Nazis started to yell, "Raus, raus, fast, fast, get out, get out." And there was some people who was worked in the who were in the camp. The workers came around, and they all told us, anybody who's under 16, tell them you are 16 years old. I was 15 at the time, and I was very little for my age anyway. I remember putting on all kind of turbans to be taller, to be seen, and sure enough, we lined up, men and women separately, and I ran over to my big brother, and I gave him a hug. And I remember looking in his eyes, and he was so scared, and he's so afraid. And I went back to the line, and that said Mengele, the Dr. Mengele. I'm sure we all heard about him. With a stick in his hand, and he just motioned with his stick. If you went this way, you went to that, this way, you were alive. And the funniest thing is, he wanted to separate and send my sister away. And I started to scream, "Meine Schwester, my sister, my sister." And very surprising, he didn't want to riot, I imagine. He wanted us to be calm. So he said, "Okay." And we went to the line where he was working. And they took us into this big, big room. And they shaved our heads, they shaved our underarms, pubic area, and it was very, very, very scary. I remember saying, I didn't have yet nothing under my arm. He said, "But we have to do it anyway." And they took us into this big room with showers on. We weren't sure, is this the showers to die or is showers to live? We were not sure at all. And we were standing around naked, completely naked all day. And late in the afternoon, finally the water came. So we knew that we are alive. And that after the shower, they gave us a little gray dress, nothing else, just a little summer dress. It was pretty cold time of the year. And anyway, after the shower, they took us to this very, very large room. And overnight, they still didn't give us any food. They still did not give us any water or anything. And during the night, it rained, actually rained. And as there was some holes probably in the roof or something, and we all lined up just to have water. And we were so grateful that God gave us this little thing that we had water to drink. And after we were about 2 or 3 days in Auschwitz, I think next day they gave us some sort of food. And of course, there were a lot of people who were kosher. They were wondering, should they eat? And then we heard that the rabbis agreed that everybody should eat whatever you give given, because you have to survive. And after a couple of days being in Auschwitz, they took us again on the cattle car. And this time, they took us to Lithuania, near Krottingen, near the capital, a small city. And it was the Wehrmacht, it was not the SS. So they gave us clothing right away because they put us to work. And they gave us actually army clothing, German army clothing, because we had nothing, just a gray dress. And they taught us how to make boots which were out of reeds, which went on top of the boots, so that keeps the German soldiers warmer. And of course, there was a quota that we have to make every day, from 5 o'clock in the morning till late until it was dark. We worked and made booths and of course, my sister had pleurisy when she was a young kid, so she always had backaches. So I was very fast. I always made sure that we make the quota. And the conditions were fairly good because they gave us enough food to survive, just enough food to survive, which is more than anywhere else that they gave us. But the problem was very shortly the Russians came. We heard already the shooting and all that, so they had to put us again in a cattle car. And we went through a couple of camps there, but eventually we ended up in Stutthof, which was a very small version of Auschwitz. Also had the crematoriums, and had all the horror there, and it was SS there. But we still worked for this, it was Arbeitszahlen, which is called. And so we still had to work every day, but this time we worked in a shoe hall, which we had to pair the boots and the shoes from the dead soldiers. You may had to bend all day long. It was hard labor, but the problem was that every morning we stayed sail upper where they canted us like cattle every day, and every 10 person was pushed out, and we never seen those people again. They were taken straight to the crematorium. And we worked very, 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 very hard, and the condition was unbelievable there. And one incident, which I just closed my eyes, which is always gonna live with me, coming home back to work, from work to the barracks, there came this wagon, and on this wagon there sat some very old-looking ladies. I'm sure they were not more than in their 30s, but the conditions made them look like that. They were sitting on it, and in the front, a couple of ladies who also looked very, very old were pulling this wagon, and in the back, also some ladies were pushing it. And they were going straight to the crematorium, and behind them was this horse, this very tall, big horse with a very tall German soldier with a big whip, and whipping them to go faster, faster, schneller. And it was such a terrible thing to see. And I think I might have been already 16 at the time. My whole fate fell apart, and that minute. I come from a very religious family, Orthodox, strictly Orthodox, but at that moment I didn't believe anymore in anything. I could not believe in God or anything after that, seeing that. And the life just went out like that. And at that time, coming back from work, we were not allowed to talk. But when you're 60, you think you could get away with things. And I said something to my sister. I didn't realize that the SS woman was nearby. And they were just as bad as the soldiers, even worse than the men SS. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she gave me the big belt, and she smacked me over the head. I was covered with blood, and I didn't have a tissue even to wipe anything. Finally, we got back to the barracks, and they washed me off somehow. And to this day, I'm surprised I had no infection. I survived it. And things were getting very, very tough because the Russians were coming very nearby. Life in Stutthof was very, very, very hard. The food, we got in the morning black coffee. At lunchtime, we got some sort of a piece of bread, which did not even look bread, but we would have been happy if they would give us enough. The hunger was always there, a terrible hunger, and you don't get used to it. It just gets harder and harder. I just remember that terrible, terrible hunger. But meantime, my sister got very sick, and she had, I couldn't get her an aspirin, so I went, there was one nurse who took care of I don't know how many people there, and she said she has to go to the hospital because she had pneumonia. And I remember this was the hardest thing, one of the hardest things I ever did in my life, walking my sister to the electric wire. We were always electric wires surrounded, to walking her with the nurse who took her to the hospital. And she was the other side of the electric wire. And I called out her name, Dwayri, go. And I see she could follow she heard me, but she could not follow she was so confused and so sick. She couldn't follow my voice. And I watched her disappear. And this was the last time that I seen her. And after that, about a week or two later, the Russians were coming very close, and they had to empty the camp. And anybody who could walk, they lined us all up. And that was the beginning of the Death March. And they took us on a Death March. We walked, and no food, no water. There was still snow on the ground. And of course, we were all underdressed. It was cold. But the big thing was the hunger. You don't get used to it at all. And as we walked every night, they locked us in to different kind of barracks, a different kind of camps, or ex-camps, which were already emptied. And we just walked on, and anybody just bent down, then they were shot right there. We were surrounded with dead, just dead, all over dead. And as we walked through the towns, the German people came out to look, just to look. Nobody threw any food or anything at us. We just walked and walked. And one day, as we walked, I actually took my life in hand. One of the soldiers threw away a fish head, and I actually bent down to pick up that fish head. I knew I jeopardized my life, and I picked it up anyway. A dirty fish head, you would die, you would be poisoned from it. And of course, it was something to eat. There was nothing to eat. Then one night they locked us in one of those barns where there was wheat in there, dry wheat. We thought it was heaven. We ate that dry wheat and we filled up all our pockets. It was nourishment for something. And we kept on walking and walking. And I don't remember how long we walked. Eventually we reached dancing. But that was the destination. They wanted to take us to dancing and just throw us into the ocean. And actually, we boarded boats. We got on big boats, and we heard screaming and shooting and yelling, and we don't know what happened. But all of a sudden, they took us, those people who were still alive. I think Himmler declared to stop the killing because it was lost everything. But they still kept on killing anyway. People were just so anxious. There was such hatred of the Jews that they just kept on killing no matter what, even when the order was to stop. And they took us off this boat, and we walked again. We ended up somewhere near Königsberg. And in a barrack, one day we just looked out the window and we seen the Germans running. And so we started to bang on the walls of the barracks where we were locked in and broke out. And as we broke out, that was the Russian army right there. And they right away took everybody out. Some people couldn't walk, they were half dead. And instantly they made tremendous camps and hospitals and doctors, and we were very lucky. And as soon as we were liberated, we got all the food and that medical care, and I became very sick. I got a typhus, and I had immediate ear infection, and a couple of other, and tuberculosis and all kind of things. But the medical care was very, very good. Every day in the hospital, the doctor used to come in. I was almost 16 by then. And it was just say, how do you feel? I said, doctor, I'm just hungry. I couldn't stop eating. And most people there, most of the kids, nobody was over 20 in that hospital. They could not eat anymore. And they used to put the food right on my table there. And I just ate and I ate. By the time I came out, I started to look human. When I went in, I was about 60 pounds, age 16.
Oh, wow.
And I just kept eating and eating without stop. And then they told us, the Russians, you are free. You could go do anything that you want. You could stay, they give you all the food and medical care if you want, or you could start going home. And after I came out of the hospital, my friends, and there were a lot of people from my city,
Yes, they know the microphone.
Oh, it went out. There's no switch on. It's on.
Oh, now it's gone.
I'll hold it. You got it?
Oh, it's back on?
Yeah.
I went to go tell Gary.
Okay.
Anyway, we're gonna decide to go back home, because the Russians told us, you are free. You could do anything that you want. See, I understand when the Americans liberated, they kept them in DP camps for 4 years. But here we were free. We could just go anywhere we wanted to. And the English were the worst. One of my cousins, my beautiful young cousin, died after liberation because the English did not even bother giving medical care to anybody. And so we started our way. We had a group of people, and we started all the way back, going back to the city that I come from. There were 2 French soldiers who attached themselves to our group, which was a wonderful thing because that was a safety factor for us. And we ended up first in Warsaw, and from Warsaw we went to Kiev. And I remember we had some old clothing on, and they had free markets, so we sold our coats and whatever we could to get some money for food. Because even there, we were liberated, there was no food, and of course in Russia, in Ukraine and in Poland, things were very bad too. In Warsaw, every building was destroyed. Businesses were in basements, and there was no food. And we stayed there in one Red Road building that stayed. And I guess because of the French soldiers, they let us stay there. And we stayed there a couple of days. We actually were begging on the street for food because nobody had anything. And we were very, very hungry again. And by the time we got to Kiev, like I said, whatever we wore, winter clothing, we sold things there so we could buy some food. And I don't know how, but somehow after a long, long journey, we did arrive to Hungary, it was at the time when we came back, it was Hungary. And I remember going back to the house where we used to live, and the house was taken apart brick by brick, because my mother was the oldest of a very large family, and she inherited all the family jewels. And of course we couldn't take anything with us. If they would catch anything, they said, if you have anything on you, it's a death sentence. You have to leave everything that you have. And excuse me, yeah. And well, anyway, I went visiting my neighbor. They already lived in my cousin's house, and they said to me, "What are you doing here? I thought you were all dead." I says, "Oh no," I says, "everybody survived. We all coming home. They almost died because they already took all the possessions of my family." And from there, I found out that two of my uncles survived in Budapest on the Christian papers, on the false papers. And one of my uncles had two little girls, 2 and 4 years old. And my aunt came from Slovakia, and she did not speak well Hungarian, and they were afraid that she'll give themselves away. So everybody knew her that she was deaf and dumb. She was a very, very beautiful lady. And the little children were taught that you cannot speak to mommy only when the door is closed, locked. That's the only time you could speak to mom. By the way, that was my uncle Hayum, and kids were racing. And they were actually told a 2-year-old kid that you can speak to mommy only when the door is locked. And when I found out that they were alive, so I went to Budapest. And while there, one of my cousins, who was a year older than I am, she came back. And together, but we couldn't stay with my uncle because there was not even a bed. We slept on the floor. They had a 2-room apartment. There was no place for us, and they had hardly any food for themselves. But then in Budapest there were kitchens, so we went to eat in the kitchens for the refugees. And we decided that we cannot stay with my uncle because he had nothing. And we decided we were going to go to Israel, to Palestine that time. So we joined one of the religious Zionist organization, B'nai Akiva, by the way, and we lived in like a commune in one of the big cities in Hungary, together. And we actually worked on the field. We supported ourselves. We waited for Aliyah. And eventually, excuse me, I think I didn't go water. Thank you. So anyway, one day a big train came to Budapest, and they collected all these young people. And we had to speak whatever we know, my dear, whatever prayers we know that we should sound like Hebrews. And it was that we were refugees from Palestine, stuck in Hungary. And they learned the book. I remember one of my aunts running after the train because she baked stuff for us to take along on this journey, and kissing, by the way. And she was always late, and the train was already moving. She gave us a bundle. Of course, we shared it with everybody there. And we ended up in Yugoslavia. And Tito was very nice. He let us stay there until we were able to go up. And eventually we wanted to go to Greece because Greece had the boats to go to Palestine. But by the time, so we went through first to Macedonia, and there this old lady came to the train. We were waiting for trains, which were very, very, days and days. They did not run. We just waited by the station. And she said to my cousin and me, "Come with me." At first we were afraid, but then we went. And she actually made us a bath. She brought the water from outside, and she heated on a stove, and she made a bath, and let us take a bath and wash our hair, which was such a big treat. It was, because we were dirty, messy, and all. And then she took us back to the train, but the train did not come. So we decided we're going to cross the mountains there into Greece, and we started to walk, hundreds of us, and we just walked and walked, and all of a sudden the on-road trucks caught up with us, and slowly they took us all in to the first city in Greece. It was called Yanina. And it was interesting because one side was winter and the other side was spring already. It was warm in Greece, it was very warm already. And then they took us to Saloniki, which is one of the ancient oldest city, I believe, in the world. And we stayed there, and that's when my father got in touch with me through the Red Cross. And of course, there was a letter waiting for me and some money. And of course, I should go register right away in the American consulate. I was not maybe close to 17 at that time. I was underage, and yet it still took a whole year until I got with my cousin and we got the visa. And it was a little bit. I wasn't really sure because I wanted to go to Palestine. I wanted to be among Jewish people, but of course we registered, and then after a whole year from Saloniki, they took us to Athens. There again we lived right outside of Athens, a place called Frankoglycia. And we worked the fields, there, and we were self-supporting. And then 2 Haganah guys joined us, and the world is very small. And he said one of the Haganah guys' name was Weiss. I says, yes, I had an Uncle Weiss in Hungary, in this certain little town. And it turned out that uncle was his uncle also.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. And I remember giving us a Jeep ride, an American Jeep. But we waited, and I lived in Greece for about 8 months until I finally was able to get a visa. Then we went from Greece to France, and from Warsaw, and then took us into Paris because we had to wait for a boat. And I was in constant contact with my father, and finally they took us back to Marseille, and we came to America. Of course, my father was remarried, and I had a little sister 5 years old. I'm not sure I would have come if I would have known. And I did ask my father if he remarried, but he just, didn't really answer me. He just told me he's listening beautiful music and thinking of his beautiful daughter. So I came, and like I said, I did not know my father. And when we arrived, there was a boat strike in New York City, and we were stationed right in front of the Statue of Liberty. And I was really disappointed in because my father used to write us letters about the Statue of Liberty. I expected something much bigger until I went to visit it, and he said it's big enough. But from the boat, it didn't look so big. But so this is the Statue of Liberty. Yes. It was a boat strike for about 3 days, and my father used to come out in a small boat. He said, "I'm your father." I didn't know him. I was disappointed in that too, because I had pictures of him, and he was a young man. He was very, very good looking as a young man. And here he was in the 50s already. And that's how, but it took me very, very short time. Within 2 weeks, I spoke English. I used the subway in New York City, because we lived in New York City at the time, downtown New York. And it was heaven in the Lansing Street. It was heaven, Orchard Street. It was just fantastic. And to me, everything, white bread was, people eating white bread. I mean, everything was just, and I had a step cousin that I bonded to, and she was an artist, and she used to come in. She lived in Plainfield, New Jersey, and she used to come in every weekend, and we spent every weekend by my step-grandparents together. And she introduced me to New York, to all the museums. And you could go to a museum, it was free at that time. Subway was a nickel. You could just travel everywhere. I arrived September 7, 1946. And to me, I instantly wanted to be an American. Of course, I was right away registered in Seward Park High School, and which was a little problem because I was 18 by the time I arrived, and I didn't speak well enough English, I suppose, and I became a junior. And of course, junior was 16 and 17 years old, so I felt very, very old in school. But I stayed, and I did attend a certain time in NYU. And to me, it was just a natural thing. And my first job was in the American Express. They just started to hire Jews, and I worked in the foreign department where we traced the checks, which was stolen and so forth. And then I had my children. But there was always a wall. We never dared to look beyond that wall. It's always, that's why most of the survivors have not spoken about anything for the first 30 to 40 years. We couldn't talk about it because ourselves, we did not come to terms with it. But yet, we knew we have children, we have to go on, and life just went on. It was very, very important, the children. Today, I'm a grandmother of 7 children and 8 great-grandchildren.
Oh, wonderful, how wonderful.
Yes, it is wonderful, yes. And every one of them are just wonderful, wonderful children. And I was 19 when I met my husband. By 23, I had both my children. And it was such a wonder to me because I was always worried that will I be able to have children after all those injections and all those food in the camps. The camps, everything had brom in it to keep us calm. That's a drug. And I always was afraid that it will affect. So to me, the biggest miracle was to have children. I really wanted many, but only 2 happened. And that was life for me in America. It was wonderful experience. And I felt I was a great achiever because eventually I worked in a hospital and I was supervisor of cancer detection clinic. And that enabled me to give my children the best education that they, as far as they wanted to go, they were able to do. And that's my biggest pride. And my children got the finest education that they wanted.
Well, I'm just
know I speak for everyone and want to thank you for being so brave and sharing what I'm sure hurts every time you bring it back. But I think...
No, it gives me great pleasure, and thank you very, very much, everybody, for coming and listening. But I think it's very, very, very important that people should know as many as possible. So perhaps by knowing that maybe I reach some people and they will not have their hate anymore in their hearts, that the hate will be, even if I change one person, then I'm satisfied. That because hate never leads to anything good. Hate is always ends up in murder and killings. And I'm very upset about today's world with all these killing that's going on. People just go around shooting people, and that's wrong. I think it's.
And I think what you did today in spreading that message of love and just caring for one another. And
yes,
the Rabbi said it so well earlier, but really from the bottom of my heart, and I know I speak for everyone, we can't thank you enough. This is so impactful, and I can't imagine that anyone is ever going to forget what we experienced here today. And thank you, and God bless you, and continue to bless you with good health. And
thank you.
And enjoy those wonderful, wonderful children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Yes, I'm very proud of every single one of them. Yes.
And I am sure they're so very proud of you. Thank you.